In this week's episode of the Breakout Growth Podcast, Ethan, Garr, and I chat with Mayur Gupta. If you're a regular listener, you'll remember a great conversation I had with Mayur a couple of years ago when he was leading growth at Freshly. Now he's the Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at Gannett, and with his broad experience driving growth, we were really excited to reconnect. If you don't know Gannett itself, then you probably know at least some of the newspapers in its portfolio, which include the USA Today network and literally thousands of other weekly and daily publications. This industry was massively disrupted by the advent of the internet and continues to change rapidly in the face of digital technologies. And Mayur is really facing this challenge head on and guiding the company as it shifts from its legacy media roots into a content subscription business for the future. So, Ethan, what do you think our audience will gain from this discussion?
Well, I think if the last few months and probably the last few years have taught us anything, it's how much and how quickly the world around us can change. And I think this conversation is really instructive because you and I always really want to understand how fast-growing companies approach and drive growth in that state of constant change. In our last full episode, we spoke to Oren Caniel, who founded AppsFlyer, and we talked about the change he and his team had to overcome when Apple changed its privacy rules. And our conversation with Mayur, I think, offers just another angle on that same theme. Ultimately, I think Mayur's success from his days at Spotify and Freshly, and now up to his work at Gannett, it really stems from his customer-obsessed approach to growth. So you may not be leading a 10,000 person company like he is, but almost definitely you're going to have to deal with change around you. That's where I think the value in this episode lies.
Yeah, definitely. Mayur really seems to have a talent for understanding the nuances of product market fit for each of the businesses that he works on. His superpower seems to lie in using that understanding to drive deep alignment across the organization. So in Gannett's case, that's pretty complex, where they have a shrinking but still significant legacy audience that reads newspapers in print, and then a new generation that consumes most of its content in digital formats. Then on top of the challenges of leading in diverse markets spread across the country, the new opportunities Gannett wants to attack in sports and gaming. And certainly you can see how someone like Mayur is going to have his hands full. But I like how he simplifies things and just breaks those challenges and opportunities into digestible chunks. It makes everything feel really actionable.
Yeah, Sean, I always worry that our listeners are going to see a name like Mayur's or a company like Gannett and think, that's just another world for me. I'm in a startup and these learnings aren't going to apply. But what seems to be consistent whenever we speak to leaders who are driving breakout growth, it's that they're all really good at articulating and building on fundamentals. And those fundamentals don't change. They're applicable at any size.
Yeah, for sure. He's hammering home things like the importance of data, experimentation, and speed. And he's doing it in context of the North Star metric. So accelerating that North Star metric. So that's something, regardless of your size of your business, those are the things that matter.
Yeah.
And yes, he's integrating them into cross-functional pods and other systems that larger companies tend to employ. But the foundation is the same really at any scale.
Yeah, I don't want to give away too much, but this was an absolutely awesome conversation. I think our audience is going to really enjoy it. So should we jump in with Mayur Gupta, Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at Gannett?
Absolutely. There's a reason we had Mayur back because I loved his previous interview, and this one just builds on that. He's a fantastic guy. So let's dive in.
Bonafide rock star.
Hey, Mayur, welcome to the Breakout Growth Podcast.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you for having me over again.
Yeah, maybe I should say welcome back. But before we go into that, I should also welcome say hey to my co-host, Ethan Garr. Hey, Ethan.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Mayur. It's good to be here with both of you.
Likewise, great to meet you as well, Ethan.
As well. Thanks.
Yeah, so as I was just saying, that Mayur's been, did you say Mayur or Mayur? Got me thinking.
I've actually forgotten the correct pronunciation myself.
Anything goes.
In Indian homes, your official first name isn't used as much.
Okay, gotcha.
But I would say Mayur.
Okay,
Mayur is pretty good. Yeah,
perfect. Okay, last time you were one of my very first guests when I started the podcast. It's still one of my favorite episodes. You were at Freshly at the time. Before that, you had been at Spotify leading growth and marketing, and so just have an awesome background. Now you're at Gannett, and I think people know a lot of the brands that Gannett has, but maybe they don't know that Gannett owns those brands. So can you, and even correct me there, is it Gannett or Gannett? Or, um,
Yes,
so
it is.
which one?
We call it Gannett.
Gannett. There you go.
Gannett.
See.
Yes, the USA Today network, because one of the most iconic brands, of course, being USA
Sure.
Today, but also many local publications, around 250 local publications like Detroit Free Press, Indian Star, and so on. But yes, it's been around 3 years or so, Sean, but it feels like 30 years worth of change has happened in those 3 years, and
Sure.
it's happening at a great pace. But um, yes, the journey has been fantastic, and I often look back and I feel a lot of it has been accidental or coincidental. But Spotify, Freshly, and here at Gannett, which the way I would think about what we are doing or what Gannett is all about is in two ways. One, what Gannett has been for 100 years as a
Mhm.
legacy media business, which typically has been driven by traffic and eyeballs and impressions. That's what media has always been about, where the core product is audience attention,
Mhm.
to where we are going now as a content subscription platform,
Mm.
which for the first time is obsessed with customer value, where the core product is no longer audience attention, but content. And content that centers around journalism, but no longer limited to it. So last year,
Mhm.
for instance, we've diversified our portfolio. We've gotten big time into sports, into betting. We are exploring into gaming. But then the future will unlock many other content verticals. And when I sat on the board of Gannett for a couple of years, which is how I got the exposure
Mm.
to the
Mhm.
opportunity and what the possibilities were. And I often think about ourselves as the Netflix of nonfiction content,
Mm.
because we want to be, when something happens in your world, either in your local community or globally, as we know some things are happening right now, we want to be the destination uh, that you believe is can be trusted, is unbiased, that bring facts to the table, that allows you to create your own opinion, because there's a lot of opinionated destinations today that unfortunately creates a lot of chaos in society. So that
Mhm.
is what we believe our mission is. But
Mhm.
the business model is fundamentally changing from an advertising led business model to a subscription led business model, which is more direct to consumer.
That's interesting. And when looking back from when you first spoke with Sean, your role at Freshly, and now this role in Spotify, um, are there a lot of similarities between the roles, or is it completely different?
um, I think it's both. It's both. There are many differences for sure when you work in an organization like a Spotify, or Freshly, and then a Gannett. Spotify and Freshly's were born in the last decade or so, where you have a lot of like-minded people, people who have been born and grown up in a world that is natively digital. So you never even hear the word
Yeah.
digital as such, because there is nothing else. Um, speed and data, experimentation, the fearlessness towards failure, the appetite to take risks. These are all very natural DNAs that you will find in organizations like Spotify, Freshly, and many more. Even
Mhm.
Dropbox, I'm sure. Back in the day, Sean. Um, and the fact that there is a constant state of paranoia to self-disrupt, because you believe that there is the only moat you have is your ability to move faster than the competition, right? So
Mhm.
you don't think that you've proven a product market fit and you stay there. You know that your product market fit is temporary. It's not,
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
not permanent, which means that you have to constantly evolve yourself, because the consumer habits and behaviors in the ecosystem is evolving so fast.
Mhm.
Now, when you work in an organization like Gannett, the USA Today network, I think there are two dimensions of differences you find. Um, One is the fact that a legacy media business, the function of marketing, just has not existed historically. And that is not
Mhm.
just us. You look at Facebook. Facebook's first CMO was when Antonio joined, and now, of course, they have a new CMO after Antonio. But those media-led businesses have not needed marketing the way direct-to-consumer businesses have, because
Mhm.
their content becomes such an organic magnetic pull. So at
Mhm.
Connect, in our crosser network, we bring 200 million unique human beings to our network every month. translate that into amount of paid media somebody would have to spend to drive awareness to bring that kind of traffic organically over and over again. So that's a big difference. Historically, that has not been needed. So now marketing at Gannett is all about the three flywheels, which you will see in consumer brands or tech brands, which is grow the brand, grow the user base, grow the user value. And that mantra for me has not gone away because I feel that those three flywheels and the intersection of those flywheels is the formula for sustainable growth. Of course, underneath that is a lot of data, a lot of science, a lot of agility, experiments, speed, etc. So I would say if I have to take a bunch of things from the Spotify's and the Freshly's, it'll be all of that. And if there is one thing I could inject into other startups like Freshly that are growing, will be that long-term commitment towards the mission and the purpose, because that tends to go away when you are scaling from one to n, when you're trying to get to escape velocity, because your pure growth becomes the purpose as opposed to way your why, which is what led you to create that idea and start the company itself.
It's interesting you say that. I think it was you. I think it was you in the interview with Sean for the Breakout Growth podcast when you're part of Freshly. I think you walked us through where you said, at first when you start, you have the mission and everything is easy, and as you get bigger and bigger, people join for different reasons, and eventually, you have to. It's your job to make sure that the mission stays in focus. So it's not, I think that was you, and I hope I'm quoting you right. But it's interesting that you're bringing that back as sort of the core thing that you bring back into those experiences now that you've had this Gannett experience, which is, as you said, largely different, but has some important similarities.
Yes, no question, Ethan. And I feel if COVID has taught all of us one thing over that 2-year period, and now let's say it's a little bit towards the fag end, hopefully, of that global crisis.
Yeah.
But 2 years back, if that taught all of us one thing, is that this is a consumer-led era where you can drive short-term growth. You can do a lot of hacks. You can invest so much in performance marketing, lower funnel, build great products. But at the end, your obsession with customer value, your obsession with your purpose and mission, because especially today's consumers, the younger generation, the Gen Zs, they are far so much more conscientious. They care about your why. They care about the impact to the environment and the universe and why you exist, just as much as they care about the functional value you provide to them.
Yeah.
And startups and COVID showed that the startups who stuck around with that are the ones who actually penetrated through and are still growing. And the ones who didn't have it actually struggled during that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously it depends somewhat on the categories that they were in. Some categories helped a lot, but I definitely found that, especially through a lot of the interviews that I did, just as people were trying to adjust to it, those that had a really strong sense of mission were able to find creative ways to deliver on that mission and to accelerate that mission, while others were like a deer in headlights and just sort of like, oh, the numbers are dropping here, whack-a-mole. Yes. They lost kind of that sense of purpose.
Yes.
So I want to take it back a little bit. So one of the things that's really interesting is, for at least for me personally, I started my career in print media. I was selling advertising for business journals across Central Europe, and I've seen and maybe paid a little more attention over the years to kind of the bloodbath that has happened in print media, just with the dawn of the internet and kind of the news spreading through a lot of different sources. And so I think just to touch on one of the things you talked about, like product market fit is not a permanent state. Product market fit is definitely fluid. And even as you were introducing Gannett, you were talking about, we've got the sports piece here, and we've got, there's a lot of different parts to the business than just that traditional core print media. Yet at the same time, it's a huge asset in the brand that's there and the loyalty that's there. And, USA Today, I think in particular, has such an accessible brand where there's just a lot of good visualizations with things, and where so much print media is not accessible for a lot of people. It's either too opinionated or it's really dense in information. And so I'm curious, as you approach growth there, how much you think about sort of, protecting that core, building on that core, getting that flywheel going, and then particularly as you launch some of these new businesses, tapping into some of the startup skills that you've got to really make sure that product market fit is dialed in, and that you're building on a strong foundation as you launch these new things, and just how you balance your time across them.
Yes, it's a beautiful question, Sean, and we could spend the whole podcast just on that question.
And that's fine with you.
I was writing down something because I feel the response to that is again a little bit of two different dimensions. One is that purely from a customer standpoint, our TAM, consumer habits, and everything, it has dramatically changed and shifted. Uh, but there are two facts. One, while the TAM for print product is not growing, in terms of raw volume, it's still substantial. The ARPU for a print product is still substantial. The margins of a print product are still substantial for any business, which means that it is still a very significant part of many businesses. Some that have transformed and some that are still transforming. So it's not something you can ignore. And if you're customer obsessed, you can't ignore a massive part of the population that still appreciate it. It's a ritual. It's a habit for them to sit in the morning, open the paper, have their cup of tea or coffee, and that's how they start the day. So we are very respectful to that. But where we have to get better is we know that the next generation, our nephews and nieces and our kids, they aren't waking up trying to buy a paper, or they aren't paying for that. They aren't even sitting and having a coffee. They're already on the move and consuming content, sitting in the subway and so on. So how do we make sure that we don't shut our eyes off, because that's where the growth is. So how we translate that is, one, we have to make sure our projections are realistic to where the world is heading. But two, also, how do we disrupt that traditional category to continue to give what that declining audience base still needs but appreciates? Very highly loyal, high retention rates, high margins, so we can't ignore it. So that's part one. And the challenge for us, or for any business, is how do you keep innovating there to make sure you add incremental value? The ground reality, or the harsh reality, is in that category in the last 15 years, unfortunately, the value has gone down and the prices have gone up. So it has been the contrary of a typical customer-obsessed ecosystem that the other part of our lives are used to, where businesses like Amazon are giving you more for the same price because they're trying to create these value modes so they prevent churn. So we're trying to bring that back on that category. But at the same time, we also know we have to catch up very quickly in the digital part of our ecosystem to become a digital native, to understand the needs of a younger audience, where the TAM is growing. And that is where that content obsession, where we have to think about diversifying our portfolio. We have to think about what else should we be providing beyond news that is going to be relevant. And that is where you can have gaming, sports, education, history. Like, for instance, at USA Today, we believe we have the most in-depth catalog of science content, space content, historical moments, in formats and mediums that you won't easily access. For example, when the unfortunate incident at Capitol Hill happened last year, our teams within a few hours created an AR experience to show you where the mob actually went in, a whole 3D model of Capitol Hill. And I was thinking, when my daughters are consuming that content 2 years later, or the kids who are going to be born now and on,
in history class,
to understand the gravity of what had happened. So that's the journey for us. The moment we shift gears and shift our mindset from a media businesses are trained to produce content. Throw that away, produce more content every day. You're a content producing engine, but you don't monetize content as an always on destination. And that's the shift that we're bringing on.
It's interesting Mayor, when you say, is there an opportunity in leveraging that ebbing population, that ebbing audience, to drive interest in the what will be the new world for Gannett? In other words, I mean, is it a are there referral loops that you can actively drive from one generation to another that you're focused on?
Yes, a great question. And there are ideas like you can have a family plan where grandkids buying a product, and you create a
Mm.
family plan so that you're creating a little bit of the network effects as well, because now it becomes a point of discussion and a dialogue, between you, and whether that is your family or your friend circle,
Hmm.
and some of that, as well as how do we make sure that the print users, when they decide they don't want to pay this much for print, which are higher ARPU products in general, that we give them an opportunity, a seamless way to give them access to digital, and many other ways. But even that notion of virality, viral loops, network effects, shareability, all those are new variables for a category like this, which has been rather linear,
Hmm.
in a very unengaged channel like print.
But I imagine someone like you who grew up in the Freshlies and as you said, the Spotify's who've only existed in the last 10 years. I would think you're somewhat pre-programmed to start thinking that way and bringing that to the organization, which is probably something that would be interesting as you
Oh, yeah,
move into your tenure.
that's been the mission every day. So we've to give you an example, in the last 20 months or so, of course, our digital subscriptions have grown 50% year over year. We are now inching closer to 2 million subs. There are only, you can count on a single hand how many publications around the globe have 2 million subscribers, for instance.
Hmm.
And we've introduced, product growth ideas like referrals, refer a friend, massive focus on retention, brought on some incredible talent, invested massively in data and data science to understand leading behaviors of retention. What are the leading indicators that tell us that a user who goes through this aha moment has X% higher propensity to come back. Um, Investing a lot in understanding science behind our content. What type of content actually drives higher conversion rate? What type of content is actually a hook content that brings an offline platform user or an inactive user back to the platform? So a lot of those lessons that we all have learned in very fast-paced growth companies is what we are bringing on Ad Connect, or coming up with bundling strategies. A lot of testing and learning happening on pricing, and how
Hmm.
that shapes, as well as the strength that at times can be a challenge is when you have 250 brands which are so localized. Every market doesn't operate the same way. The quality
Hmm.
of content can be so different, as well as the consumer needs in community one versus community two, the heartland of America versus coast. The behaviors are so different and unique that you
Hmm.
have to take different approaches to even engage those audiences.
But I have to assume that there's an advantage in the sense of you can still have informed hypotheses as something works well in one market. When you have that many markets, there's so many testing loops that you can go through, and just because it worked in one doesn't mean it's going to work in the other, but also doesn't mean it's not going to. And so, if you can build the right skills on the growth level in each of those markets, I think that cross publication learning could be super high.
it's it's massive. It's almost like we have created archetypes of markets. So while we have
Yeah.
250, not all 250 are unique,
Yeah.
and also not all 250 are one. But they also, you can pretty much create cohorts of markets based on behavior,
Hmm.
and many different levels. So there are perhaps 5 or 6 cohorts of markets beyond the volumes that we have.
Hmm.
And what we try and do is we try and experiment. So when we're doing A/B tests, we want to make sure that we are testing 2 markets that sit in the same cohort,
Right.
to make sure you have better understanding.
Hmm.
Um, and also, like most businesses, the 80-20 rule, 20 rule still applies. Top 20 markets for us contribute 70% of our growth.
Sure.
But what we're trying to do is, as I've mentioned, growing the brand, growing the user base, growing the user value. One flywheel which is very relevant to us is creating new demand, which
Hmm.
is, yes, the top 20 markets are brilliant markets for us. But how do we create the next 10 markets, which are going to become the top markets for us? And that's where the top of funnel investment in marketing, where do we invest the brand dollar?
Yeah.
Should I invest a brand dollar in the markets where we are already killing and we are penetrating and the growth rate is high? Or should we invest then in markets that could become the future growth markets for us to create that emotional connection and then bring a lot of growth strategies there to scoop up the volume?
Yeah. So I'm sure, Ethan, you're probably
Yes.
pins and needles with a question or two, but
Go
I
ahead.
just want to get one in here. Just I'm assuming that that when you came in, probably there were some blind spots in the data, and I'm just curious how much you've needed to sort of invest and up level the data so that you can make some of those decisions.
Yes, I was smiling because were there blind spots or we were just blind, which is not surprising because, and we don't shy away from it because when you're in advertising business, you don't think about the consumer. You know, what we thought about is there were four human beings who came, but now what we have to think about, wait, hold on, there was Sean and Ethan who came, and this is what Sean likes to consume versus this is what Ethan likes. So it's a whole, everything shifts from the data model to the app instrumentation, to the kind of tools you use to ingest that data. Because very tactically, web analytics is no longer enough. Now you need an amplitude or a mix panel because you need to see, wait, what are they doing differently?
That user level view. Yeah.
The user level view. So it's a paradigm shift that we've had to go through. So to answer the question on how much, we've hired a chief data officer who came from HBO Max and Take Two Interactive, so gaming and content.
Wow, yeah.
That happens to sit in my organization because I wear two hats, strategy and growth. But the remit is horizontal across the board. We are in the process of adopting a CDP, which is a must-have. We've had a CDP, but not world-class. That is already piped with every single part of our communication.
Can you explain for the audience what a CDP is?
Yes, like a customer data platform that becomes the universal repository for every single aspect of customer behavior data on platform, off platform, but not a static repository, a live repository that has inbound and outbound data flow into your content engines, into your content management systems, and everything. We've built a data science team. We've hired folks from growth companies who are coming and telling us and challenging the status quo, telling us what needs to be done on day one. Historically, the data has been focused on what happened, which is look back and report. The massive shift that we've been in the journey in the last 20 months or so has been why it happened. So that's one, that's analysis. And then predictive models on how do I prevent it from happening in the future. So that's data science. Right? So all those levels. But one of the big takeaways for us has been, because as an organization, we've grown with so many mergers and acquisitions, underneath that has been disparate set of data sources. So when the world talks about data, I know there's so much infatuation with ML, AI, data science, predictive model, propensity scores. There's such little conversation about data engineering and the quality of data.
Data silos.
Data silos, and because it's garbage in, garbage out. So we focused, especially in the last 12 months, we have now focused a lot on, first of all, up-leveling the quality of that data, having the data pipes in place. So we now have a VP of data engineering in the same global organization, because we are trying to make sure that we first have the right foundation, because otherwise the quality of data science, the quality of predictions will only be just as good or bad as the quality underneath.
Yeah. So Ethan, sorry, I'm going to do one more.
I got it.
I see him like tee up to ask a question. Have you been able to execute in the meantime while you get the data house in order, or has it really kind of put limitations on what you could do from an execution perspective?
Yeah. Brilliant question. And I would always expect you to ask that question because we are all startup people, right? So what do you do when you're baking all of that? So the answer is absolute yes. And my push to the organization has been, I don't care about a Tableau dashboard. We don't want to care about an online version. I want most of my leaders to live in spreadsheets and to make pivots. to make decisions, to look at what's going on, and also very importantly, building that critical thinking where you focus more on not getting the right answer, but what are the right questions to
Yeah.
ask.
Right.
So we've done a lot of that. So we know we're not waiting for perfection. So there's a lot of analysis happens every day, and the focus has been, while we get more advanced sets of data, what we have to build, which we have, I think, successfully, is the mindset to
Right.
apply the data, the
Yep.
rhythm. So there are scrums that now happen every other day in data teams. There are Friday sessions that happen where our research and insights team is doing share outs, trying to get the why. We've launched ethnographies. We've done call and con studies in different parts of the organization. And while we have so much more to do, so many dots to connect, we said, why don't we first dive deeper in each isolated piece? So it's okay where content analysis is not connected to consumer behavior, but that's okay in the short term. Let's understand what content is working, what is the funnel performance, and what is the customer data analysis that we have. And then we will gradually connect the dots,
Yeah.
as opposed to waiting for all dots to be connected first before
Yeah.
we start to do the analysis.
So that actually ties into what I've been trying to get to ask. Actually,
Sorry.
Which is, it's interesting when you look at you're talking about getting this mindset. I'm looking at your just giant organization that spans across the country. How do you get that mindset, that culture to take across the entire organization? Is it important that it takes place at that local level, or does it just work at your level, at the corporate level?
Well, first of all, evolution and transformation like that requires every single ounce of energy and every single human being in the organization to believe in it. So the answer is, first of all, that it's not one person or one team's transformation. It is the entire organization evolving from its core. But in ground reality, how did we enable that, or how are we trying to enable that for 16,000 people, an organization, multi-billion in revenue, but 100-year-old that had a very different business model? So the first thing we did, and I had the benefit because I sat on the board, so I understood the organization, the leadership, and trusted each other. The first step was, and I know that Sean and Ethan, you guys, we've exchanged a lot of notes on this on LinkedIn as well. It was very clear that we first had to determine what our North Star was, what the end destination is. So top down, right? Because there are a million places we could go, but we may not have the right to go to those million places. So what is the one place we would roughly like to go? Not worrying about how we're going to get there, because there is no finite GPS to get to the end state. But if you don't have the end state, you're extremely bottom up.
Yeah.
So we had to have that. So we've defined that in a very quantitative way. There are 5 North Star priorities. Each North Star priority has a quantitative destination or definition of success in a certain amount of time that we've quantitatively defined and actually publicly shared. Then the journey is, okay, that's top down. Now, how do you translate that into bottom up? What is the organization going to do in the next quarter? What is the organization's OKR? And how does that OKR translate back down? But that becomes a lot easier because we had 16,000 people now look in one direction. May not be one spot, but one direction, as opposed to 160 directions back in the day.
Yeah.
Now we've translated, we're using OKRs as one of many tools to figure out that everything you do has to ladder up to those top 5 North Star priorities. And in an organization like us that is evolving, oftentimes it's about trade-off calls. It's prioritization, it's choices. Because in some cases, we have to say no to high volume revenue, which is less value, to low volume revenue, which is high value. Like trade-off between an advertising dollar versus a subscription cent. Or a print $10 to a digital subscription $2. Those are trade-offs that we have to constantly make. But having the prioritized set of North Stars enables everybody in the organization to build that autonomy to make those choices. And then one of the other things, Ethan, to your point, I did, which I learned at Spotify, is the concept of cross-functional pods. At Spotify, we call them the squads, the chapters, the tribes. And which was one of the first things that I brought on here. We first created a strategy and ops function, which is very atypical in fast growth companies. And then we introduced the concept of cross-functional pods that basically has members staffed from a data science team, product engineering, performance marketing, brand content based on the mission of the pod. But then you have this cross-functional group of people who actually have a shared outcome. They have one set of OKRs that they're aiming towards, and they have autonomy. They have a pod leader. So there are a lot of those changes that we had to make in our operating model, in a clear definition of success for the whole company, that then translates back down into the set of pods, but also the functional areas like content, marketing, growth, engineering. And now it's all about just test and learn and just continuously make pivots.
Yeah, when you look at OKRs and North Star metrics, I think they're not mutually exclusive, and I think they work especially when you put those together, they can be super effective. When you see people create OKRs all the time, but they don't actually have a clear North Star metric that actually excites the rank and file that they can lean into. And I think when you tie those together like that, it gives you a real opportunity to drive impact.
Totally. And I'm a firm believer that in all modern companies and in all functions, especially in marketing and growth, you have to be a system thinker. Because when you're a system thinker, you go top down and bottom up. You can't be just top down and you can't be just bottom up. And sometimes in early stage startups, everyone's trained to be very bottom up. You're living week by week. You're just looking at that, but you lose sight of where you're going. Sometimes you can tend to spin off a lot of stuff, a lot of good chaos, but you exert yourself too much. You overexert yourself and you lose energy and oxygen. Whereas in big companies, you're too much top down. There's too much strategy and planning for 5 years out. But wait, who's talking about what's going to happen in the next 3 months? So it's that system thinking that converges the two, exactly like you said.
So I'm curious. I assume that that it sounds very challenging in terms of what you've needed to do over the last few years. What is there any part that just stands out as being like more frustrating or just harder than you even thought it would be? And I know that's a sensitive question because you never want to like throw someone under the bus if it's more kind of departmental focus, but just high level speaking anyway.
Yes. Look, first of all, I think one thing that we've evolved as an organization, as a leadership team, is having being open to being vulnerable, and being able to talk about it. So, because unless you do that, you're not going to drive change.
Right.
So that's not a challenge. But I would say the challenges that we have aren't team specific. They are still cultural. They're still mindset.
That's what I figured.
And the biggest one I would say is the velocity of decision making. There's a lot of other stuff that we've come a long way. The cross-functional partnership, the better understanding of the core priorities and the choices we need to make. We've created an operating model that should drive a lot more autonomy. But there are still a lot of places where I would love faster decisioning, with a belief that if the decision failed, you make another pivot, as opposed to preventing that subsequent pivot. Or in other words, and this is a quote that somebody shared with me, which I thought was spot on, that your job as a leader is to stop people who think that their job is to stop failure.
Mm-hmm.
In big organizations, when you have people who've been around for so long, they believe that their job is to prevent failure.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're driving change, your job is to stop those people. And it is that fear of failure at the end of the day that pretty much inhibits or stalls your growth as a company. And I don't mean to say that, hey, everybody start failing, because when I've said this before, even in a startup world, I had a leader who said, I know everybody keeps saying that, but nobody likes to fail.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept thinking about it for a long time until I realized that the only person who thinks that failure is bad is because you haven't tasted insane success after you have failed.
Right. So I think Amazon has really tried to embrace that mentality, and you think of things like Fire Phone, and there's like an Instagram kind of image based
Yep.
purchasing. They've got some of these huge failures, but I was just analyzing them in the last couple of days, and I think they have 6 different kind of distinct businesses that are $20 billion a year businesses, and you don't do that without taking some chances
Yep.
and be willing to take on some failures along the way.
Yes. Yes. And I would say that is the one thing that we have to keep getting better at, and keep improving.
Is
Yeah,
it?
and so just one just quick question. Sorry, Ethan.
Yeah.
They come in bursts, but I'm really curious as you've gone from the Spotify's and Freshly's of the world into a company like Gannett that's been around for a long time and has some great assets to leverage, but has a lot of opportunities for improvement. Um, do you think that that there are just hordes and hordes of these more legacy companies that are out there that could benefit in similar ways with a lot of the things that you're doing now and in kind of borrowing from the startup world and applying those same massive shifts in how they approach the business and think about the business?
I don't think that's a choice, because if they aren't doing it, then they're going to perish. And the good news is that we aren't the first one, and we won't be the last. In fact, I look up to personally other organizations that have dramatically shifted. At one point, they were about to perish.
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft. I mean, I know about it because I read Hit Refresh. I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of that book. But that showed how Satya, as he came on board in that role, at that scale of an organization, completely shifting the business model, investing so much in cloud when it was barely a drop in the ocean back then, but to be able to see
Yeah.
the future and the kind of change. Look at Best Buy. Was totally transformed what the company is today. It's not an Apple, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a growing business.
Right.
And so many great examples. Even I remember even at one point with Amazon's insane growth, people thought Walmart's out. But when I look at Walmart e-commerce,
Yeah.
it's been a fantastic,
Some
story of
some of
growth.
that is cause and effect though, because it's even like the Microsoft one. It's easy to look at a lot of the things that they've done that have driven that success. But I actually ran a workshop there about 8 years ago, and I think
Sure.
that probably had the biggest impact on their outcome. No, I'm joking.
I would believe that.
But yeah, I mean, the one, in all seriousness, I think that probably the cultural change is the hardest one, and that's the feedback I've had on my book for years, is that one person will get excited about what they read about, and then they go and they try to apply it, and the organization just rejects it because there's so much inertia in how they've been doing things, and
Yes.
being able to drive a company through that cultural shift and cross functional can't happen one function at a time. It's got to be a
Yes.
collective decision, and it's hard. So I think,
Yes. And
yeah.
I will say one thing I missed adding was that you can't also drive all the change with all the people you already have. You have to
Mhm.
believe that you also need disruptive thinking.
Yeah.
You need diversity. And I don't mean diversity just in the sense of ethnicity and gender, but at diversity from an experience standpoint, diversity from who these individuals are. So I'm a firm believer in that. So invested a lot myself, having in the last couple of years, we brought people from companies that are absolutely out of the category, from the likes of Spotify, of course. We've hired people from Peacock. We've hired a few people from hardcore tech companies, from PayPal, from eBay, Aura, very disruptive startups, very small shops here in Brooklyn and New York, for example, because those are the people who bring no baggage. They
Yep.
come and they break down the windows on day one,
Yep.
right? And they're asking the question, why not, on day one itself?
So that leads me, I want to go back to, I love what you said about failure, that the only person who's afraid to fail is the one who really hasn't experienced and tasted huge success. Because I feel like there may not be a truer statement out there. But leading a smaller team, 10, 20 people, I found it was really easy to model the vulnerability and to say, look, here's a mistake I made. Why are you afraid to make your own? Right. But how do you do that at scale? I mean, you're in a 16,000 person organization. I think how do you do that at that size?
You do exactly what you just said, Ethan. Exactly what you just said, which is when you are on a town hall, and our town halls have not 16,000 but 4 to 5,000, you talk about the failures that you've had as a leader, first of all, because I don't believe that the leaders can create a culture of taking risk, an environment where people feel safe, if they only talk about their successes. So it all begins from that one individual or a set of individuals to say, this is what I did. I was the one who made that choice. I realize it ain't working. We are going to pivot. How much we talk about that. And then how do you celebrate failure is also about not being okay with failure. How do you celebrate it? Which means that when a team fails, what do you give to them in the next iteration? Do you give them more budget? Do you give them one more person to try something? Do you give them two more areas to try and test and experiment on? And when you start to do that, it spreads like wildfire.
Yeah. I think when the message you convey is that the cost of making mistakes here is that you get to come and make a new mistake tomorrow.
Yes.
I think it can be incredibly powerful for teams.
Yes. Yes. One trait that big organizations have to learn is when to say no, or when to de-link an idea, when to determine that it isn't working.
Yeah.
It's very similar to people as well. When you're in a big organization, we don't fire people. We take a lot of time to hire them, but they just stick around. And sometimes it's not a match. Sometimes you're not a value match, right? Mm-hmm. And those are some of the traits that we have to pick. Organizations have to learn from faster companies, younger, more disruptive. Whereas, like I said earlier, the culture, the mission, the purpose is what younger companies have to take from these big organizations, because there's a reason how and why they became so big.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something I was talking about, looking at Amazon and seeing some of the failures they had. I also looked at Apple, and it is actually interesting though to see that the big failures seem to get smaller over time with those companies. And I think part of it is just exactly what you're saying, is that they start to incrementally approach some of them and figure out when to pull the plug before it becomes such a noteworthy failure, instead of the Newtons and some of the things in the early days of Apple that really hurt them.
Yes. And that's a muscle that we are learning to build too, is and we've changed the taxonomy. So we talk about product market fit a lot in our world now, which is fantastic. But how do you define product market fit? When do you know that the world is telling you that you don't have the right to play here? Right? Yeah. Because is it a tough choice? Hey, is it my job to continue to optimize to reach product market fit? Or what signal is telling me that maybe I've tried enough? Maybe we don't have the right to play there. Maybe it's a complete shift. So there's no finite answer, but you're right. I think the companies that have done it well are the ones that have figured that out.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things that the bigger the company, the more that they feel like they can almost sort of jam a solution down the throat of the market, that they have they start thinking about leveraging distribution before they think about getting the solution just right. And
yes.
And that's why you have such a high failure rate.
That is such a brilliant point, which is, and that's why I challenge myself and the teams always to define the product market fit, because the product market fit isn't about how do I bring another 100 million people to consume this content. It is about how do you bring the 1,000, but bring them more often, keep them there. That's the signal, because scale will happen, but the quality of how they're engaging for a new idea is quintessential.
Yeah, I was talking to a CEO yesterday, and I kept talking about premature scaling is what kills startups, is what kills new products. And then he finally said, what the hell is premature scaling? And, like, so am I not supposed to get people on this? And so the way that, it was a good question. And so the way that I kind of went back to him, I said, do you have financial forecasts for the business?
Yeah.
And he said, yes. Do you have a single paying customer? No. How in the hell can you build financial forecasts on a business with 0 paying customers? So step one, start charging, like now that you've got good engagement on the product for free. And then from there, how do I get enough customers who love the product while paying for it, that it tells me now I can start to scale this, and I can scale it based on real numbers. So I think that's just kind of an example. And obviously that's a lot longer conversation on the whole product market fit journey, but it's a muscle that is definitely not one that is strong in older established businesses.
Yes. And for us as a subscription platform now, that lever that you just gave the example for, Sean, is retention and the time spent on platform.
Yeah.
Because before I bring 10 million people, I just want to know, are 100 people spending 2x more time than they will spend on another platform with that much scale? How often are they coming back? Are they bringing other people along with them? And so on.
Yeah, I literally had a conversation with a founder right before this conversation, a company that I'm advising, where the runway's getting short. I gotta get enough traction to raise that next round of funding. So different situation from more established companies. But to me, it was like, he's like, I need 100,000 active users. And I said, you could get 100,000 active users pretty quickly, but what you may find is that 1 month later you have 30,000 active users, and then 10,000, and then 0. So what I would instead focus on is have a target that says I need 30,000 active users that have been retained for at least 45 days. And use that as your target, even if that's a proportion of the overall 100,000, but focus on the cohorts and not on the aggregate number.
Yeah, totally.
So, again, longer conversations, but I personally have been really fascinated that I've had more large enterprises reach out to me about product market fit workshops than startups in the last 12 to 18 months, because I think they are realizing that the failure rate of innovation is so high in larger companies that they need to tap into that startup mentality and skill set.
Totally. Yep.
So I had this question teed up in my head. You're the chief strategy officer, and I thought interesting question to ask you would be, in 5 years, if you look back and you say, I've been successful and we've been successful as an organization, what will that success look like? And I want to ask you that question, but I want to, instead of giving you that 5-year time frame, I want to go back to the beginning of this conversation where you said big companies have a tendency to look at that too far ahead, and small companies maybe look too short term. What's the right? So let me ask that question, but give you the option to say, what's the right term to look at your strategy and execution and how that look back period?
Yes. I don't know if there is any finite, but I would say 3 to 5 years still sounds right. Only because you can have all kinds of data science and project, but the world's going to be dramatically different. Like our world today is so dramatically different even 2 years back. So it's almost impossible to fathom what it's going to be 3 to 5 years. But I think for the investors, for the street, you do need to have that foresight, the 3 to 5 years. So I would say that's a pretty reasonable time frame to know where you are going. Because if you don't have that much, then you're just driving. You're driving very well, but you're driving not to a destination. You're just driving well, right? So that's a challenge. But if the question, Ethan, is, so when I look back 3 to 5 years from now in my journey at Gannett, where would I like to be?
That's the question.
That's the question. Okay. So I think I would love for us to have established ourselves as that trusted destination where we are top of mind for people. Today, they come more organically. They're on the search. They're looking for us. 200 million of them do come every month. But I want us to be a very conscious choice. I want us to become ritual for a diverse set of people, some who are coming to consume every day what's happening around the world. We want younger people to come. because we are providing them entertainment with great quality gaming and content. We want sports enthusiasts to come. We want to drive education. So there are many different facets, but I would love to have become a conscious choice, a destination where you every day you think about us, where something happens in your life, you think about us. Um, in terms of the business model, would have loved for more than 50% of our business, of course, to become more repeatable subscription, which we have publicly shared. We would love way more than 50% of our audiences to consume our digital products. But we do believe our print products will still stay because there's a reasonable amount of population that still respects that still needs it. But that's what I would say. And we have a big part of our business that supports the local communities, the local businesses. That's a SaaS business, and would like that business by that time to have become a SaaS platform that is enabling and inspiring these small businesses to thrive in a digital economy, to thrive in that digital world. So we come close to that. It would have been a successful journey in us accomplishing our mission and purpose.
Awesome. So one of the questions that I asked you at the end of our last interview, I didn't get a chance to go and look at the answer that you gave last time, and you probably didn't either. But hopefully it won't be the same answer. But it's what do you feel like you understand about growth now that you may not have understood a year or two ago? And it's okay if it's the same answer, because then it just means you understand it even better.
Well, if you say a year ago, he wasn't back. It was at least a year ago since he.
Yes. I would say that growth is not a tactic. Growth isn't a hack. They work, right? Sometimes you come across, but outside in, when you are looking for a hack, looking for a tactic, it will never work. I think growth is a foundation. It's a mindset. It's a set of capabilities. It is a combination of a lot of things, and growth is an outcome. It's not an input.
Right.
But I think some of what happened 12, 13 years back with the growth team being created, it became it became an input. And that led to some tactics. But I think every business is realizing that growth happens at the intersection of all functions. And while you may have some sporadic spikes, sustainable growth is a mindset, it's a culture, it's a behavior, and you have to keep at it, every single day.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with everything that you just said there. Some of my key takeaways from our conversation today are really that the focus on data, getting the data house right is super important to being able to support that long-term execution that leads to driving that flywheel of growth over time, and then working on the culture and giving people the ability and permission to make some mistakes, but having that feedback loop with the data and ultimately stepping out of the comfort zone of maybe how they've done things in the past. And that's going to require some mistakes, but that will hopefully develop the culture to where that test learn motion becomes a much more important part of what's happening at Gannett. And clearly with the growth in subscriber numbers that you talked about, good things are happening now already. And I'm excited to see them continue to improve as some of the longer term investments in the data and that cultural transformation start to take even more hold. Ethan, anything that jumps out at you beyond that in terms of key takeaways?
I was definitely, as I said, really drawn to your take on failure and mistakes. The same thing Sean just echoed. But I also thought what you said about tying that North Star to the objectives and the OKRs. I thought that's really meaningful, and that's something our audience can really take away. I think teams are always trying to find the right tools so that they can, lever up growth. But when you put things in perspective like that, this is where we're trying to go. It's very clear. It's mission driven, and here's a tool set to get us there. Seems like a winning approach.
Awesome.
Cool. Any last thoughts? Anything we didn't ask you about that you're wanting to share, or are we ready to wrap things up?
No, this is great. Thanks for having me over.
But I do have one last thing. It sounds like as you're growing, there's probably lots of opportunities. Is it for any of our audience members who might be looking for new roles? Is there anything that
Oh my God, man, we are on a hiring spree across all teams: data science, analytics, our growth teams looking for people to run retention, our creative team, hiring people there. Our content organization, I know that our chief product officer is looking for an insane amount of engineers. And
So it sounds like what we need to do is get a link to your key hiring and put that in the show notes, and then somebody, once this comes out, somebody can get the latest snapshot of exactly what you're looking for. But it sounds like such a cool, exciting journey, and it seems like you would be an amazing guy to be working with along the way. So I think, and I got to assume that the team that is coming up around you is equally inspiring, and so I think you'll get a lot of interested people reaching out to you.
Yep, looking forward to it. Wonderful.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to share with us how you're approaching growth at Gannett, and it's so awesome to compare it with what our previous conversation was about, and I'm hopefully we'll be able to get you back on at some point, because they're always such great conversations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks, Sean, Ethan. Wonderful to meet you guys again, and thanks for having me over.
Thank you.
Have a good one.